Guadalcanal, January 1943. The air is so thick with humidity you feel like you're breathing water. Every leaf, every vine, every shadow in the jungle drips with a constant, maddening rhythm. For the American soldiers here, this island is a living nightmare, a green hell where the enemy is as much a part of the landscape as the trees themselves. And it's in this claustrophobic world that we meet a young intelligence officer named John George. George is different. While his fellow officers carry standard issue M1 Granzor carbines, he cradles something almost laughably out of place, a Winchester Model 70. This isn't a military weapon, it's a sporting rifle, the kind you'd use to hunt deer back home in the States. To make it even more peculiar, it's topped with a long, slender hunting scope. His peers, down the just noties, they openly mock him. They call it his toy rifle and laugh at the absurdity of bringing a civilian gun to a war zone. But John George isn't fazed. He simply smiles, a quiet confidence in his eyes that no amount of ridicule can shake. He knows something they don't. He sees the jungle not as a wall of green, but as a complex chessboard, and he has brought the perfect piece to play the game. The Japanese have turned this jungle into a sniper's paradise. They are masters of camouflage, tying themselves into the high branches of banyan trees, becoming ghosts with rifles. They pick off American troops with terrifying precision, sowing fear and chaos. Patrols are pinned down, supply lines are cut, and morale is plummeting. The conventional military response is to blast the treetops with machine guns or even artillery, a brute force method that wastes ammunition and rarely hits the hidden marksman. It's like trying to kill a mosquito with a sledgehammer. The command is desperate for a solution, a way to fight fire with fire, to hunt the hunters. This is where John George steps forward. He volunteers for a mission that sounds like suicide, to go into the jungle alone and take out these snipers one by one. His superiors are skeptical, but with few other options, they reluctantly agree. As he slips away from the American lines, the laughter has died down, replaced by a tense, curious silence. He melts into the dripping undergrowth, becoming one with the shadows. For George, this isn't a mad dash, it's a hunt. And he is a hunter. He moves with a patience that seems almost inhuman. Where other soldiers would rush, he remains perfectly still for hours, his eyes scanning every leaf, every branch, every patch of light and shadow. He's not just looking for a person, he's looking for anomalies. A vine that's bent the wrong way, a patch of leaves that seems just a little too dense, the subtle glint of a lens, or the unnatural straight line of a rifle barrel hidden in the organic chaos of the jungle. This is where his hunting experience from back home becomes a lethal weapon of war. He understands the art of seeing what doesn't want to be seen. His technique is a masterclass. In stalking, he moves slowly, deliberately, placing each foot with surgical care to avoid snapping a twig or rustling a leaf. He uses the terrain to his advantage, crawling through muddy creek beds and using the thick vegetation as cover. His senses are on high alert, the call of a bird, the sudden silence of the insects, everything as a potential clue. He is completely alone, deep in enemy territory, surrounded by unseen eyes. The tension is immense. Any mistake, any sound, could mean a bullet from a ghost he'll never see. Then he spots it, a flicker of movement high in a banyan tree, almost imperceptible. Most would dismiss it as the wind, but George's instincts scream otherwise. He raises his Winchester Model 70, the toy rifle, and brings the stock to his cheek. Through the hunting scope, the jungle canopy is brought into sharp focus. He carefully scans the branches, and there, nestled in a crook, he sees it, the faint outline of a helmet, a face painted to blend with the leaves, and the long barrel of an Arisaka rifle. The enemy sniper is patient, waiting for an unsuspecting target. But he has no idea he is now the one being hunted. George controls his breathing, in, out. His heart rate slows. He is calm, focused. The world outside the circle of his scope disappears. There is only the target. He gently squeezes the trigger. The crack of the rifle shot is sharp and violent. A single, definitive sound that cuts through the jungle's drone. High in the tree, the hidden figure slumps, then tumbles through the branches, crashing to the forest floor. One down. George doesn't celebrate. He doesn't even pause. He immediately melts back into the shadows, repositioning, knowing that the sound of his shot has just announced his presence to every other enemy soldier in the area. The hunt has just begun. Over the next 4 days, this silent, deadly dance continues. John George moves through the jungle like a phantom, a whisper in the green. He uses his uncanny vision and deep understanding of fieldcraft to locate one enemy sniper after another. Each stalk is a nerve-wracking test of patience and skill. Each shot is a testament to his mark. The ridicule from his fellow officers has long since vanished. Now, when the sharp, distinct report of his Winchester echoes from the jungle, it's a sound of hope. It means John George is at work. It means one less ghost in the trees. The transformation is complete. The man with the toy rifle is now a legend. He finds a sniper hidden inside a hollowed-out log. He spots another by the glint of sunlight off his eyeglasses. He outwits a team of 2 who are trying to draw him into a trap. With each successful shot, awe and respect grow back at the American lines. The officers who had laughed at him now speak his name in hushed, reverent tones. He is doing the impossible, fighting the enemy on their own terms and winning decisively. By the time John George returns to his unit, he has single-handedly eliminated 11 confirmed Japanese snipers. He didn't use overwhelming firepower. He used intelligence, patience, discipline, and the precision of a master marksman. He proved that in the right hands, a sporting rifle with a scope could be more effective than a whole squad of infantrymen. He demonstrated that the most powerful weapon in the jungle wasn't a machine gun, but the mind of a hunter. John George's 4 days in the Guadalcanal jungle were more than just a successful mission. They were a pivotal moment. He wasn't just a soldier with a good rifle. He was the prototype. He was the living embodiment of a new kind of warrior, the combat marksman. A soldier who combined the ancient skills of a hunter with the modern technology of a precision rifle. His actions planted the seed that would eventually grow into the highly specialized sniper programs of the modern American military. It all started here, in the suffocating heat and dripping green of a Pacific island, with one man and his hunting rifle. The birth of a legend. Fresh from the brutal, mud-soaked hell of Guadalcanal, George emerged a changed man. He had survived the chaos, the constant threat of ambush, the relentless hum of the jungle, but he carried more than just scars. He carried knowledge, hard-won, paid for in blood, and desperately needed by an army still learning how to fight this new kind of war. The high command saw it too. They saw in George not just a survivor, but a teacher. He was tasked with a mission that would change the face of American warfare forever. To forge the Army's first-ever sniper section. His training ground wasn't a pristine firing range. It was a slice of rugged wilderness, meant to mimic the unforgiving environments they'd face. This is where George began his quiet revolution. He wasn't looking for the soldier who could hit a bullseye 1,000 times in a row. He was looking for a different breed. He handpicked his men, not for their brawn, but for their brains. He sought out the patient ones, the observers, the men who had grown up as hunters and scouts. He looked for the quiet intensity in their eyes, the kind of focus that could hold steady while the world exploded around them. The lessons began not with a rifle, but with the earth itself. The jungle is your greatest ally or your deadliest enemy, he'd tell them, his voice low and steady. You have to learn its language. He taught them camouflage, not just as a pattern on a uniform, but as an art form. He showed them how to use mud, leaves, and shadows to dissolve into the terrain, to become ghosts. He'd walk a line of his camouflaged students, pointing out a misplaced leaf, a glint of skin, a silhouette that was just a little too perfect. Nature is messy, he'd say. You have to be messy too. Then came the art of movement. Stalking. He taught them to read the terrain like a map, to understand the dead ground, the lines of sight, the subtle dips and rises that offered cover. They learned to move with the patience of a predator, a slow, deliberate crawl, timing their movements with the rustle of the wind or the distant sound of artillery. He would have them stalk him, and for hours, none would succeed. He'd suddenly appear behind them, a silent specter, a tap on the shoulder, a stark reminder of their vulnerability. "You saw me because I let you," he'd explain. "The enemy won't be so kind. The goal is simple. See before you are ever seen." He drilled into them the core principle of their new craft: observation. They spent countless hours just looking, training their eyes to pick out the unnatural. A broken twig, a patch of dirt that was too dark, a shape that didn't belong. He combined the practical lessons of a hunter with the disciplined theory of a soldier. He brought in experienced trackers and frontiersmen, men who had spent their lives reading signs the average person would never notice. They learned that the most powerful weapon wasn't the rifle in their hands, but the sharp, analytical mind behind the scope. Only then did they truly embrace their rifles. George wasn't just teaching marksmanship. He was teaching a relationship between man and machine. He would walk the line, correcting a stance, a grip, the way a soldier breathed. "Your rifle is a part of you," he'd say, adjusting a leather sling. "It breathes when you breathe. Its heartbeat is your heartbeat." He had them disassemble and reassemble their weapons, blindfolded until it was pure muscle memory. He meticulously showed them how to adjust their scopes, to account for wind, for distance, for the subtle drop of a bullet over 1,000 yards. This wasn't about volume of fire. It was about the certainty of a single, decisive shot. Patience was the hardest lesson. In an army built on aggression and forward momentum, George was teaching stillness. He would have his men lie in a concealed position for hours on end, enduring heat, insects, and the crushing boredom, just waiting for a target that might never appear. He was forging a new kind of discipline, the mental fortitude to remain invisible, to wait for the perfect moment. It was a war of nerves, a silent battle fought within the sniper's own mind. He was shaping them into something new, a scalpel in an army of sledgehammers. Through his quiet instruction, under the canopy of leaves and the watchful eyes of their mentor, these young marksmen were being transformed. They were no longer just soldiers. They were becoming specialists, a new breed of warrior fighting with precision, intelligence, and lethal patience. George wasn't just building a unit, he was creating a legacy. These men, hand-picked and honed by his experience, were the genesis. They were the first sniper section in the history of the United States Army, and the doctrine George was riding in the dirt with them would echo across battlefields for generations to come. Burma, 1944. Forget everything you think you know about war. This isn't a battlefield of open fields and clear lines. This is a living, breathing hell of mud, monsoon, and malaria. This is the world of the 5,307th Composite Unit, better known to history as Merrill's Marauders, and it's where we find George again, having traded one unforgiving jungle for another, far more deadly one. The mission was audacious, bordering on insane. A long-range penetration unit tasked with marching hundreds of miles through Japanese-held territory to disrupt enemy supply lines and capture a key airfield at Merrill. They were volunteers, every single one of them, drawn by the promise of a tough, vital job. None of them could have imagined just how tough it would be. The march began. Almost immediately, the jungle became the primary enemy. The monsoon rains were relentless, turning the ground into a clinging morass of mud that sucked at their boots with every agonizing step. The air was thick, a humid blanket weighing down on them, so dense you felt you could chew it. Sweat didn't evaporate. It just streamed, mingling with the rain and the grime, a constant state of dampness that bred fungus and rot. For George, the discipline honed in the Philippines was all that kept him moving. One foot in front of the other, the weight of his pack, his rifle, and his ammunition was a familiar burden, but here it felt 10 times heavier. Their rations were meager, designed for a fast-moving unit. Rations mostly, barely enough to sustain a man sitting still, let alone one marching 20 miles a day through dense jungle and over steep mountain ranges. Hunger became a constant, gnawing companion, a dull ache in the pit of the stomach that never, ever went. How? The men started to waste away. Their faces grew gaunt, their uniforms hanging off their skeletal frames. Jungle rot, A terrifying collection of fungal infections began to take hold. Feet swelled, skin cracked and bled, turning into open, weeping sores that refused to heal in the perpetual damp. Dysentery swept through the ranks, leaving men weak, dehydrated, and humiliated. And then there was the fever. Malaria and typhus, carried by the swarms of insects that were their constant companions, burned through the unit. Through it all, George was a steady, quiet presence. His experience in the Philippines had given him a certain immunity to the jungle's psychological warfare. While others started at every snapping twig, their nerves frayed to the breaking point by the constant threat of ambush, George's senses were sharp, attuned. He knew the sounds of the jungle, the way the light filtered through the canopy, the signs of enemy presence. His marksmanship, once a skill, now became a lifeline for his platoon. He moved with a ghostly quietness. When a Japanese sentry needed to be removed without a sound, it was George who was called upon. A single, muffled shot from his M1 Garand, a silent fall, and the path was clear. His rifle wasn't just a weapon, it was a surgical instrument. During rests, which were few and far between, he would be the one finding a hidden position, his eyes scanning the dense foliage, providing a silent, watchful overwatch as his exhausted comrades tried to steal a few moments of peace. He had seen what a surprise attack could do, and he was determined it wouldn't happen on his watch. But even George wasn't invincible. The fever found him, too. One day, the world began to tilt. A crushing headache set in, followed by violent body-racking shivers that no amount of clothing could stop. Then came the fire, a soaring temperature that left him delirious, muttering in a haze. His platoon mates helped him, half carrying him, refusing to leave a man behind. It was the unspoken code of the Marauders. You kept moving, or you died. Through sheer force of will and the precious, dwindling supply of Atabrini tablets, he fought it. He would lie on the muddy ground, shaking, then force himself to his feet and stumble onward, his rifle a crutch. The jungle had tried to kill him once. He refused to let it win now. The psychological strain was immense. The enemy was everywhere and nowhere. The threat of a sudden, violent encounter hung in the air like the humidity. They would be marching, lost in a trance of exhaustion, and suddenly the air would split with the crack of rifles and the chatter of machine guns. They would dive into the mud, instinct taking over, returning fire into the green maze. These firefights were brutal, chaotic, and terrifyingly intimate. Then, as quickly as it began, it would be over, leaving behind silence, the smell of cordite, and more of their men who would never get up again. George witnessed the attrition firsthand. He saw men, brave men, simply give up. Some just sat down on the trail and refused to move, their minds and bodies broken. He saw others succumb to disease, their last moments spent in a feverish delirium far from home. Of nearly 3,000 men who started the campaign, only a few hundred would remain combat effective by the end. The unit was being bled dry, not just by the enemy, but by the jungle itself. Yet, they pushed on. Their objective, the airfield at Miachina, became a singular obsession, the only thing that gave their suffering meaning. In this crucible of endurance, the Marauders were forged into something beyond a military unit. They were a brotherhood of survivors, bound by shared hardship. George, the quiet hunter, the survivor of Botan, was one of them. He was a man who had marched into hell not once, but twice, and through discipline, skill, and an unbreakable will to live, he was still marching. The war was over, but for Captain John George, the fight had just begun. Not a fight with bullets and bayonets, but a battle of ideas, a struggle to preserve the hard-won lessons of the jungle. He returned to the United States, not as a mythic hero, but as something far more valuable. A thoughtful analyst, a veteran with a story that needed to be told. The jungles of Guadalcanal and Burma had been a brutal, unforgiving classroom, and George had taken meticulous notes. He wasn't content to let those experiences fade into memory. He knew the difference between life and death often came down to small details. Details that were being lost in the grand narratives of the war. So, he sat down to write. Terrasolt was Shots Fired in Anger, a book that was as much a confessional as it was a combat manual. He poured everything onto the page. the sweat, the fear, the frustration, the moments of stark clarity. He wrote about the inefficiency of standard-issue equipment, the grim reality of close-quarters combat, and the psychological toll it took on a soldier. This wasn't a story of glorious charges or Hollywood heroics. It was a raw, unfiltered look at jungle warfare from the perspective of the man on the ground. George meticulously detailed every firefight, every ambush, every patrol. He analyzed the performance of American weapons versus Japanese weapons with an engineer's precision. He talked about the M1 Garand's strengths and weaknesses, the frustrating unreliability of the M1 carbine in the damp, muddy conditions, and the surprising effectiveness of his own personal rifle. He didn't pull any punches. He criticized flawed tactics and poor leadership, not out of bitterness, but out of a desperate need to make things better for the next generation of soldiers. Shots fired in anger became a sensation within military circles. It was unlike any other book written about the war. It was practical, honest, and filled with insights that you couldn't find in any official field manual. For the first time, soldiers and officers had a first-hand account that spoke their language. It examined the nuances of combat marksmanship under extreme stress, dissecting the split-second decisions that determined who lived and who died. It was a masterclass in small unit tactics, written by a man who had mastered them through survival. The book quickly became required reading at places like Fort Benning, influencing the training of countless. George's expertise was now in high demand. He transitioned into a new role as a consultant for the U.S. military. He brought his battlefield experience to the testing grounds and the design boards. He helped shape weapons evaluation programs, ensuring that new firearms were judged not just on their performance in a stereo lab, but on their ability to function in the chaos of combat. He was a powerful voice for the infantrymen, constantly advocating for gear that was reliable, effective, and user-friendly. He understood that a soldier's confidence in his weapon was a weapon in itself. His work had a lasting impact on military doctrine. The lessons he'd learned in the Pacific jungles helped inform training for future conflicts, from Korea to Vietnam. He championed the idea that marksmanship wasn't just about hitting a target on a range. It was about fire discipline, about making every shot count, about understanding the psychological dimension of a firefight. He pushed for more realistic training scenarios, forcing soldiers to think and react under pressure, just as he had been forced to do. And then there was the rifle, his beloved Winchester Model 70. Before the war, it was just a Hikwala hunting rifle, prized by sportsmen. But in John Georgia's hands, it became a legend. It had proven beyond any doubt that a civilian rifle, chosen with care and handled with skill, could outperform standard military-issue weapons in certain combat situations. His exploits turned the Model 70 into an icon. The story of the hunting rifle that changed battles captured the American imagination. It became a symbol of individual skill and ingenuity. Because of George, the military began to take the concept of a dedicated sniper rifle more seriously, leading directly to the development of specialized systems used by snipers today. The legacy of his Winchester is etched into the history of modern military marksmanship. In the end, John George's greatest weapon wasn't the steel and wood he carried through the jungle. It wasn't the Model 70, as famous as it became. His true weapon was his mind, his sharp, analytical intellect, his ability to observe, learn, and then articulate those lessons with stunning clarity. He was a soldier, yes, but he was also a scholar of war. He translated the brutal language of combat into a text that could save lives. He turned his personal experience into institutional knowledge. His legacy is twofold. It lives on in the pages of Shots Fired in Anger, a book still read and respected by soldiers and historians alike. And it lives on in the training and equipment of the American military, in the countless small improvements and doctrinal shifts that he helped to inspire. John George was a quiet professional who left a loud and lasting echo. He was a shooter, a writer, and a teacher, and the American soldier is still benefiting from his wisdom today.